Dr. Ethan Cole adjusted the strap of his portable analysis kit as he stepped off the shuttle ramp. The docking bay was cavernous, lit by an even white glow that reflected off the smooth, metallic walls. For all its advanced construction, the Valnari station seemed eerily silent. No bustling activity, no idle conversation. Just the hum of hidden machinery and the distant murmur of ventilation systems. A pair of tall Valnari awaited him. Their elongated forms and smooth, pale blue skin gave them an otherworldly elegance. One wore a flowing silver robe, the other a simple gray jumpsuit. Their violet eyes scanned him with what he could only interpret as polite curiosity. Ethan had spent weeks memorizing the basics of Valnari etiquette. But now, standing in front of the real deal, he wasn't sure if he should bow, nod, or just stand still. "Dr. Cole," the robed one greeted him, their voice smooth and melodic. "I am Prefect Taven. Welcome to the station. This is Vyara, one of our researchers. She will be assisting you." Ethan gave a slight nod. "Thank you. I'm honored to be here." Vyara offered a faint smile, then motioned toward a corridor. "If you would follow us, Dr. Cole, we'll escort you to the reliquary chamber." As they walked, Ethan couldn't help glancing at the alien researchers. Prefect Taven moved with measured grace, his every step deliberate. Vyara, on the other hand, seemed more relaxed, occasionally casting a curious glance his way. The corridor walls were lined with geometric patterns that pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat, though their purpose remained unclear. "Your people have studied the reliquary for a long time," Ethan ventured, breaking the silence. Taven answered without looking back. "Centuries. The knowledge contained within it has long eluded our understanding. We hope that your fresh perspective may help us unlock its secrets." Vyara chimed in, her tone more conversational. "We've developed complex algorithms, even created dedicated intelligences to analyze the reliquary's inscriptions. Yet we find ourselves at an impasse. Perhaps your human intuition can uncover what our logic has missed." Ethan nodded, considering her words. "I'll do my best." They turned a corner and entered a larger chamber. In the center, under a dome of translucent crystal, the reliquary rested. It was an object of otherworldly beauty, an intricate lattice of shimmering materials that seemed to shift and glimmer as one looked at it. Ethan's breath caught. Even without understanding its purpose, he could feel its significance. Prefect Taven gestured toward it. "This is the reliquary, our most sacred artifact. It is said to contain the wisdom of our forebears. We have translated fragments, but the underlying structure remains an enigma." Ethan stepped closer, his curiosity overriding his caution. "What exactly have you been able to translate so far?" Taven hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. Finally, he said, "Scattered phrases. Symbols that seem to refer to knowledge, to understanding the universe, but nothing cohesive." Ethan turned to Vyara. "And you've personally worked on this?" She nodded. "For many years. But the more I study it, the more I suspect that we've been approaching it from the wrong angle." Ethan tapped his chin thoughtfully. "Sometimes a new set of eyes helps. I've worked on a few stubborn puzzles back on Earth. Not quite on this scale, but maybe some of the techniques I've used will apply." Vyara's lips curled into a faint smile. "I hope so. We've tried everything we know." Taven cleared his throat, regaining their attention. "Dr. Cole, we will leave you to acclimate. Vyara will remain to assist you. Please do not hesitate to request additional resources." With that, Taven turned and exited the chamber, leaving Ethan and Vyara alone with the reliquary. Ethan pulled his analysis kit closer, opening it to reveal a suite of scanning tools and a portable interface. "Well," he said, glancing at Vyara. "Shall we get started?" She moved to a console and activated a holographic interface. "We've archived all previous attempts. I can show you our most recent findings." Ethan stepped up beside her, looking at the floating symbols. They were intricate, interwoven shapes that almost seemed alive. "Can I see the raw data?" he asked. Vyara raised a brow but obliged. The display shifted to a series of complex glyphs accompanied by spectral readings and energy signatures. Ethan leaned in, studying the patterns. "These look almost like waveforms," he mused. Vyara tilted her head. "Waveforms? Yeah. Back on Earth, we have certain scripts, ancient languages actually, that were designed to mimic the rhythm of speech or natural patterns. These symbols remind me of that. Maybe they're meant to be interpreted more dynamically rather than a static text. Viara nodded slowly. Interesting. No one suggested that before. Ethan gave her a small grin. Well, if you bring in a human, you might as well get some human thinking. She chuckled softly. Fair enough. Hours passed as they worked side by side. Ethan would point out connections and Viara would cross-reference them against the Valnari archives. Their initial formality gave way to a more comfortable camaraderie. By the end of their session, Viara even shared a bit of her own history, how she had first encountered the reliquary as a student, how its mysteries had drawn her into research. Ethan, in turn, spoke of his childhood fascination with the stars and his dream of one day working with alien civilizations. As they packed up their equipment, Viara glanced at him. I think you might be right. A dynamic approach might yield new insights. Ethan shrugged. It's just a hunch. But I've found that sometimes hunches can lead to breakthroughs. She smiled, and for the first time, he noticed the warmth behind her violet eyes. Then let's keep it. And with that, their collaboration truly began. Chapter 2, The Question. Dr. Ethan Cole adjusted the settings on his portable spectrometer as Viara pulled up another set of archives on the console. The two of them had spent most of the day poring over the data in silence, but Ethan couldn't shake a feeling of unease. It wasn't the artifact itself, though it was more intricate and bewildering than anything he'd encountered before. It was the weight of tradition he felt hanging over the room. The Valnari culture, as polite and elegant as it seemed, was utterly bound by rules and customs. It was as if the answers had to fit into a predefined box, one that might not even exist anymore. I'm starting to get the sense that your people don't question things very often, Ethan said, breaking the silence. Viara glanced over, her pale blue face inscrutable for a moment. What do you mean? Ethan gestured at the console. All this data you've collected, decades, maybe centuries of it. And yet you haven't tried anything outside the methods you've been taught. Every approach you've mentioned follows the same pattern. Viara frowned slightly. Those patterns are based on principles that have served us well for a long time. We trust our forebears' guidance. But what if their guidance was incomplete? Or, I don't know, wrong? Ethan hesitated, gauging her reaction. I'm just saying that sometimes a fresh perspective doesn't just mean using different tools. It might mean rethinking the whole approach. She straightened, her posture suddenly more formal. Are you suggesting that our ancestors didn't know what they were doing? Not at all, Ethan said quickly. I'm suggesting that they might have been working with the information they had at the time. But now we have new information, and maybe it's time to step back and ask some basic questions. Viara crossed her arms, her tone cooler. What sort of questions? Like, why is it so important that the answers fit within your doctrine? The room fell silent. Even the faint hum of the station seemed to fade. Viara stared at him, her violet eyes unblinking. For a moment, Ethan wondered if he'd gone too far. That's a bold question, she said at last, her voice quieter. Ethan held his hands up. I'm not trying to offend anyone. It just seems like if you're trying to solve a puzzle, you have to be willing to look at it from every angle, including angles that might not fit into the neat little categories you're used to. Viara turned back to the console, her fingers hovering over the controls but not touching them. You don't understand what you're asking. If we reject the framework our ancestors gave us, it's not just a matter of trying something new. It means questioning the foundation of our entire culture. Maybe it's worth asking the question anyway, Ethan said gently. You can still respect your ancestors' wisdom while considering that they might not have had all the answers. I mean, don't you ever wonder if there's more out there than what you've been taught? Viara was silent for a long moment. Then she let out a slow breath and shook her head. You humans are very strange. Strange how? She finally looked at him again, her expression softening slightly. You seem so comfortable with uncertainty. With the idea that your understanding could be incomplete. For us, that's unsettling. Well, Ethan said, offering a small smile, uncertainty is what drives us to learn. If we thought we had all the answers, we'd never make any progress. Viara tilted her head. And you think we've stopped progressing? I don't know, Ethan admitted. I just think you've been running in circles because you're afraid to step outside the boundaries. She regarded him thoughtfully, then turned back to the console. I'll consider your perspective. But don't expect centuries of tradition to shift overnight. Fair enough, Ethan said, returning his attention to his spectrometer. But it's a start, right? Over the next few hours, the two of them worked more closely than ever. Viara's initial defensiveness gave way to curiosity, and she began asking Ethan questions about human exploration, about how humanity approached unknowns, about the times humans had overturned their own assumptions and changed the course of their history. Ethan shared stories of Earth's greatest discoveries and the unexpected paths that had led to them. Your species seems adaptable, Viara observed during a short break. Ethan shrugged. It's not always pretty, but yeah. We've learned to adapt because we've had to. Our planet's history is full of challenges that forced us to think differently. Viara nodded slowly. Perhaps that's what we've been missing. We've grown so comfortable with our traditions that we've forgotten how to adapt. It's never too late, Ethan said with a small smile. Viara met his gaze, a hint of a smile playing on her own lips. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple, Ethan admitted, but it's worth it. As they returned to their work, Ethan could feel a subtle shift in the room. Viara wasn't just assisting him anymore, she was beginning to truly collaborate. She asked more questions, proposed small but significant changes to their methodology, and even suggested running an experiment that the council might have considered unorthodox. The results weren't immediate, but they were promising enough to keep them both motivated. By the time they finished for the day, Viara looked more thoughtful than ever. I'll admit, Dr. Cole, you've given me a lot to think about. Ethan smiled. Call me Ethan. She raised an eyebrow. Ethan. Very well. And you can just call me Viara, she added almost as an afterthought. Fair enough, Ethan said, gathering his equipment. So, same time tomorrow? Viara nodded. Same time. As Ethan left the chamber, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, just a small sense that maybe, just maybe, he'd opened a door that had been shut for far too long. Chapter 3. Breaking Barriers. Ethan entered the research chamber the next morning to find Viara already working at her console. Her pale blue fingers glided over the holographic interface, the symbols dancing in response. She glanced up as he approached, a faint smile forming on her lips. Good morning, Ethan, she said, her voice carrying a note of warmth that hadn't been there before. Morning, he replied, setting down his analysis kit. You're early. I couldn't sleep, she admitted. I've been thinking about what you said, about questioning old patterns. And? Ethan asked, pulling out a small scanner and adjusting its settings. Viara hesitated. I started going over the data again, cross-referencing energy signatures we dismissed because they didn't fit our models. I think I may have found something. Ethan straightened. You mean you broke away from the usual approach? I suppose you could say that, she said, almost reluctantly. It's not much, just a correlation between certain waveforms and a cluster of symbols we hadn't paid much attention to before. That's a start, Ethan said, stepping up beside her. Show me. She tapped the console, and a section of the holographic display expanded. The symbols looked like intricate vines winding through geometric shapes. Overlaid on top were faint energy signatures, their peaks and troughs forming a pattern that caught Ethan's eye immediately. Wait, he said, leaning closer. These peaks. They're almost identical to a signal we picked up in a deep space probe years ago. We thought it was just background radiation, but this looks deliberate. Viara's brows knitted. You mean you've seen something like this before? Not exactly, Ethan clarified, but close enough to make me think it's worth investigating further. What happens if you isolate this cluster and amplify the signal? Viara nodded and made a few adjustments. The hologram shifted, the peaks becoming more pronounced. The symbols glowed faintly, as if responding to the amplified energy. Interesting, Viara said. It's almost like they're interacting. Interacting? Ethan asked. Yes, she said, her voice gaining a hint of excitement. I've never seen this kind of response. If the symbols aren't just passive inscriptions, then maybe the reliquary isn't just an archive. It could be a communication device. Ethan grinned. Now we're getting somewhere. If it's a communication device, then it might need a specific sequence to speak back to us. But how would we determine the correct sequence? Viara asked. Trial and error, Ethan suggested. If we can identify a pattern in these signals, we might be able to tune in and see what happens. Viara's eyes narrowed in thought. That's highly unorthodox. Isn't that the point? Ethan said with a grin. Let's run a test. Take the strongest signal and try modulating it with one of those waveforms you showed me earlier. See if the symbols respond. She hesitated, then nodded. All right, let's try it. As Viara worked, Ethan retrieved another piece of equipment from his kit, a portable field generator capable of fine-tuning energy outputs. He placed it on the console and connected it to the holographic interface. This will let us adjust the waveform in real time, he explained. Viara raised an eyebrow. Impressive. Your technology is more versatile than I expected. More like cobbled together, Ethan admitted with a chuckle. But it gets the job done. They spent the next hour fine-tuning the energy outputs, adjusting the waveform parameters and watching as the symbols on the reliquary shifted and pulsed. Each small change seemed to trigger a new reaction, the symbols glowing brighter or dimming in response. For the first time since he'd arrived, Ethan felt a genuine sense of progress. At one point, Viara leaned closer to the console, her head nearly touching his. Look at this, she said, pointing at the display. When the frequency reaches this level, the symbols align in a way I've never seen before. Ethan glanced over, their faces just inches apart. He couldn't help but notice the faint luminescence of her skin, the way her violet eyes seemed to shimmer. He cleared his throat, pulling back slightly. Yeah, I see it, he said, focusing on the display again. It's like a pattern within the pattern. If we can trace that alignment across all the symbols, we might have our sequence. Viara nodded, clearly immersed in the work. I'll start mapping the alignment now. As she worked, Ethan found himself marveling at her dedication. He hadn't expected to form such a strong partnership with a Valnari researcher. When he'd arrived, she had been cautious, even distant. Now, they were working side by side, trading ideas and pushing the boundaries of what was possible. After another hour, Viara leaned back with a sigh. There. The sequence is mapped. Now we just need to test it. Let's do it, Ethan said. Activate the sequence and see if it triggers a response. Viara hesitated, her fingers hovering over the controls. If this works, it could change everything. But if it fails? We'll learn something either way, Ethan said. Go for it. She nodded and initiated the sequence. The chamber filled with a low hum and the reliquary's symbols began to shift. The glowing patterns grew brighter, forming a cascading wave of light that spread across the artifact's surface. Ethan and Viara watched in awe as the symbols rearranged themselves into a new configuration. It's responding, Viara whispered. Ethan couldn't help but smile. Now we're talking. For the first time, it felt like they were breaking through the walls of tradition. The reliquary wasn't just a static relic. It was alive, in a sense, and willing to reveal its secrets to those brave enough to ask the right questions. Ethan glanced at Viara, catching her eye. There was a spark there, a shared excitement that went beyond the research. It was the thrill of discovery, and they were in it together. Chapter 4, The Touch of Trust. Ethan stared at the shimmering patterns on the reliquary. After hours of methodical adjustments and careful readings, they were finally getting somewhere. The symbols on the surface of the artifact no longer felt like a random collection of shapes. They moved in sequences, flowing from one configuration to another, as though the reliquary itself was responding to their efforts. Every small success felt like a piece of the puzzle falling into place. It's incredible, Viara murmured, standing beside him. Her violet eyes were wide, focused on the shifting light. This level of responsiveness. I never thought I'd see it in my lifetime. Ethan smiled, glancing at her. Guess all it took was shaking up the status quo. She turned to him, her expression softening. You have a way of doing that. Well, when the usual methods aren't working, he let the sentence trail off with a shrug. Sometimes you just need to ask different questions. Viara nodded slowly, then returned her gaze to the reliquary. The council will be difficult to convince. Even with this progress, they may still resist any conclusions that don't align with our traditions. They don't have to agree right away, Ethan said. What matters is the truth. Once we have enough evidence, the results will speak for themselves. She tilted her head, considering his words. Your confidence is unusual. For us, the idea of challenging long-held beliefs is deeply unsettling. For you, it seems almost second nature. Ethan chuckled. Humans are pretty good at questioning things. Sometimes it gets us into trouble, but it's also how we grow. Vi. And me how much more we can accomplish when we step outside those boundaries. Glad I could help, Ethan said with a grin. He reached out and gently tapped the console. So, what's next? Viara smiled faintly. I'd like to try a broader scan of the entire artifact. Now that we have a response, we might be able to detect more patterns further inside. Ethan nodded. Let's do it. As they worked, the atmosphere in the chamber became more relaxed. The initial formality between them had dissolved, replaced by an easy rapport. Ethan would crack the occasional joke and Viara would respond with a soft chuckle or a witty remark of her own. It was a dynamic that reminded him of collaborating with his colleagues back on Earth, different species, different worlds, but the same sense of partnership. At one point, Viara leaned closer to the console, her concentration fully on the data. Ethan noticed her proximity but said nothing. He was focused on the readings himself, noting a particularly strong signal that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the artifact's light. There, he said, pointing. That signal. It's stronger than the others. If we isolate it, we might trace it back to a central node, Viara finished, glancing at him with a small smile. I had the same thought. Great minds think alike, Ethan said, grinning. Viara arched an elegant brow. Is that a human saying? One of many, he replied, shifting his attention back to the console. You'd be amazed at how many sayings we have. Half the time, even we don't know where they came from. Viara chuckled softly, a sound that carried a surprising warmth. I'd like to hear more of them sometime. Sure, Ethan said. I'll teach you all the classics. The hours ticked by as they continued their work. The two of them fell into a comfortable rhythm, their hands moving over the console controls with practiced precision. The patterns in the reliquary grew clearer, and their understanding of its intricate systems deepened. It was demanding, meticulous work, but neither of them seemed to mind. When they finally paused to take a break, Ethan stretched his arms over his head and let out a contented sigh. Progress feels good. Viara watched him with a curious expression. You seem so at ease with uncertainty. With the possibility of failure. Ethan shrugged. Failure's just another step forward. It tells you what doesn't work so you can try something else. She tilted her head, studying him. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple, Ethan admitted. But it's necessary. You can't make progress if you're afraid to fail. Viara considered his words for a moment, then nodded. Perhaps that's something I need to learn. You're already learning, Ethan said. Every time you try something new, you're proving that. A comfortable silence settled between them. Ethan took a sip from the water flask he'd brought, then glanced at Viara. You know, it's been great working with you. I wasn't sure how things would go at first, but well, I'm glad we're in this together. Viara's gaze softened. I feel the same way. I never expected to find common ground with a human, but I've come to value your perspective. And your company. Ethan smiled. Likewise. For a moment, their eyes met and Ethan felt a strange, unspoken connection. It wasn't just the shared sense of accomplishment or the camaraderie of working on a challenging project. It was something deeper and understanding that went beyond words. Shall we continue? Viara asked, breaking the moment but not the warmth in her voice. Sure, Ethan said, clearing his throat and returning his focus to the console. Let's see what else we can uncover. As they resumed their work, Ethan couldn't help but feel that they were on the verge of something extraordinary, not just with the reliquary, but with each other. For the first time, he felt a genuine bond forming, one built on trust, curiosity, and the shared drive to uncover the unknown. Chapter 5, Shattering the Doctrine. Viara and Ethan worked in tandem, their movements so synchronized that neither had to ask the other what came next. The reliquary's shifting patterns, which had once seemed like an impenetrable labyrinth, now followed a sequence they had gradually decoded. Each glowing symbol pulsed with meaning, each wave of light suggesting another layer of understanding. This alignment, Ethan said, pointing to the cascading symbols on the console's display, it's not just aesthetic. It's a guide. Viara glanced at him, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. You've been saying that from the beginning. And it looks like I was right, he replied, grinning. She chuckled softly. I'll admit I doubted you at first. But now this alignment forms a path. If we follow it, we might reach the core of the reliquary, Ethan finished. He leaned closer to the display. The question is, how do we interact with it once we're there? Viara gestured to another cluster of symbols. These here. They're repeating, almost like an invitation. I think if we input the sequence we've discovered, it might trigger the next stage. You're sure about that? Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow. No, she admitted, but we've come this far. If we stop now, we'll never know what's inside. Ethan nodded. All right, let's do it. They worked side by side, carefully entering the sequence into the console. The chamber around them seemed to hum with energy, the air growing warmer as the reliquary's light intensified. When Viara pressed the final command, the artifact emitted a low, resonant tone, followed by a ripple of light that spread across its surface. It's reacting, Viara whispered. Looks like we're on the right track, Ethan said, his voice steady but laced with anticipation. What's next? The console displayed a new pattern, more intricate than anything they'd seen before. Viara studied it carefully. These symbols. They resemble some of our oldest scripts, but they're slightly different. Almost as if they're an earlier version, Ethan said, finishing her thought. Like an ancient precursor language. Viara nodded. Exactly. If we can translate these, it might reveal the reliquary's original purpose. Ethan rubbed his chin. Maybe we can use your archives to cross-reference the symbols. If they're similar to your ancient scripts, we should be able to find matching structures. Viara smiled. You're thinking like a Valnari now. I'll take that as a compliment, he said, returning her smile. The two of them dove into the archives, scanning through layers of historical data and ancient texts. They worked quickly, each suggestion building off the other's ideas. It was a race against time, fueled by their shared excitement and determination. Hours passed, but neither seemed to notice. At last, Viara straightened, her eyes gleaming. I think I have it. The sequence references an archive deep within the reliquary's structure. It's not just storing knowledge. It's preserving a connection to something greater. A network of information that predates our earliest records. Ethan leaned closer. You're saying this thing is a repository for a galactic data network? Possibly, Viara said. Or maybe it's a message, a call to anyone who can decode it. Ethan shook his head in amazement. No wonder your ancestors held this in such high regard. But why didn't they figure it out? Perhaps they didn't have the tools, Viara said. Or perhaps they were too bound by their own rules to see what was right in front of them. And now? Ethan asked, meeting her gaze. Viara hesitated. Now we have a choice. We can present these findings to the council and risk their rejection. Or we can keep working quietly, gathering more evidence. Ethan considered this. What's the risk if we go to the council now? They may view our approach as heretical, Viara said. They could shut us down, forbid further research. But if we succeed, we could change how the Valnari see themselves, how we see our history. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of support. You've already done so much. Whatever you decide, I'll back you up. Viara met his gaze, her expression softening. You're not just here to solve a puzzle, are you? I came here to help, Ethan said simply. But I didn't expect to find this. A flicker of something unspoken passed between them. Ethan cleared his throat and stepped back. So, what's it going to be? Do we tell them now? Or do we keep digging? Viara turned back to the console, her hands moving gracefully over the controls. Let's gather a little more data. If we can show the council undeniable proof, it might make them more willing to listen. Sounds like a plan, Ethan said. Let's get to it. The next few hours were a blur of activity. They traced the patterns through the reliquary's network, uncovering more fragments of information with each step. It was meticulous, exhausting work, but neither seemed to mind. The shared goal kept them focused, the excitement of discovery driving them forward. At one point, Viara paused, her hand hovering over the controls. Ethan, look at this. He moved closer, squinting at the symbols on the display. What am I looking at? This sequence, Viara said. It's a direct reference to our earliest myths. Stories of our ancestors reaching for the stars, seeking knowledge from beyond. It's as if the reliquary is confirming that those myths were based on real events. Ethan whistled softly. That's incredible. You realize what this means, right? Your people weren't just receiving knowledge, they were part of something much bigger. A civilization that spanned the stars. Viara nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. It changes everything. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder again. You're the one who's going to bring this to light. You and your people. Us, she said, glancing at him. You're a part of this now, too. Ethan smiled. Fair enough. They returned to their work, each discovery adding to the growing picture of a long-lost connection between worlds. It was a journey neither of them had expected to take, but one that had brought them closer in ways they hadn't anticipated. As the patterns continued to unfold, Ethan couldn't help but feel that they were on the verge of something extraordinary, something that would not only redefine the Valnari's understanding of their past, but also their future.